Is the sponsor of our keynote address here during our lunch. Dan Pienta is the market president for Northern Trust Company for Eastern Michigan. So we want to welcome Dan and certainly appreciate Northern Trust's sponsorship for many years of this event. And we're so proud and pleased to have them back again. So Dan, please come on up.
Thanks, Joe. It's great to be back again with everybody for another year for a great day of networking and knowledge sharing. And like she did earlier, I just want to recognize all the hard work that goes into putting on a day like this. It's a great, lot of effort, but a great time to network. Northern Trust has over a 125-year history of supporting the communities where we do business. And our participation here today would be one example of that. We provide that support through employee volunteering in the community, working with our nonprofit clients, or directly with our personal clients to guide them in their giving and legacy strategies. Our partner, Claudia Sangster, is joining us today to speak on our work with our clients and how that may intersect with what you do for your respective organizations. Claudia Sangster is Director of Family Education and Governance in Wealth Management at the Northern Trust Company. In this role, she designs the firm's advisory capabilities in financial education, family decision-making, and relationships around money and wealth. Claudia collaborates with clients and their advisors and wealth planning partners in identifying, in establishing appropriate educational programs and governance structures for multi-generational families in order to prepare them to steward their wealth, enhance family unity, and help sustain all aspects of the family's capital. Claudia earned a bachelor's degree from Pepperdine University, as we learned this morning, and a JD degree from the University of Houston College of Law. Please join me in welcoming Claudia.
Right after this one. There. Oh, that's not.
Okay, I'm just going to get out of this one. Okay. Do you see yours on there?
Yep. Okay. There you go.
And
perfect.
Reading view.
One more over. Oh, there you go.
Is that it?
That's it.
Perfect.
Thank you. Well, welcome everybody. So delighted to be here with you this lovely day in Michigan. I think you're having better weather today than we are in Los Angeles. And it's so much fun to be here because last week I was at the Western Regional Conference, Plan Giving Conference in Costa Mesa, and Lonnie spoke there as well. So I asked Lonnie, are you following me or am I following you? Just not quite sure anymore. It's interesting how we tend to find each other over time, and Lonnie did a great job this morning, so he's kind of set the table and talking. Today I'm going to talk about something that's not quite as practical in one sense because it's not necessarily about fundraising, but every time we talk about planned giving with our donors, every kind of gift is a planned gift. I think all of you know that by now. So Lonnie was talking about the type of ask, and so I'm going to talk about those today. What should we be thinking about when we're trying to work with our clients to find the right fit, kind of the way, Lonnie, you know, we still need to find the right fit at the right time for the right reasons, and so hopefully today we'll learn together about what that looks like. I wanted to also say that one thing that all of us do, and I think pretty well as fundraisers, is we do know how to say thank you to our clients, right? And Lonnie talked about that a little bit. But I know that when I was at Pepperdine in their planned giving department, I realized that they had taken to heart, I think, something that was instructed to them by, did anyone remember Gerald Panis? Anybody? Sure. And wow, this is great. Where's Gerald when you need him? What really resonated with us was the rule of 7. Anyone remember the rule of 7? That every donor over $1,000, whatever threshold you determine is appropriate for your organization, should get 7 different thank yous of some form. And every Friday, we had a list going around that had all the donors from that week that were over $1,000, and we were expected, and frankly liked doing it, to write notes to that donor. Hopefully better than the one that Lonnie got from the Pepperdine School of Law, and I'm going to call that guy. But nonetheless, thanking is not just good for the donor, it's really good for us because it reminds us that we should be so grateful for those who have supported us with their financial resources in a way that makes them feel happy about the gift that they're making, but also happy about the transaction that occurred. Because I learned as a fundraiser that the next best gift is what? From the last donor. Your best gifts come from your prior donors, do they not? When I think about relationship building, even in the wealth management world where I reside now, it's interesting because to acquire a client or to acquire a donor, it takes a lot of effort, a lot of time. And so if you've already invested that much into that relationship and you're continuing to work with them and be a part of their lives, then that's the next best gift. That's where it's going to come from. I had one donor who created a charitable remainder annuity trust. I just left the practice of law. It was the first big gift I worked on. And I remember one day at 3 a.m. when I was still at the office drafting documents and working with the outside attorneys, I thought, why did I leave the practice of law? For a better life, you know? But after the deal was done, I had breakfast with that donor every Friday for the next 2 years. Because stewardship is not just about thanking, it's about continuing that relationship. So stay in touch because most of our transactions, our gift vehicles, are really long-term in terms of having a connection with that individual or individuals over time. All right, let's see. So we're going to talk, people ask, well, what is family education and governance and what's it got to do with planned giving? I probably should explain that. I actually did philanthropy planned giving for 20 plus years before I came to Northern Trust and started to see that I needed to work with multi-generational families in a different way, which includes philanthropy, by the way, but we have a whole team that does philanthropic advisory services. So I stepped over and now I facilitate family meetings, but I could always tell you that in my toolbox, philanthropy is a big tool for working with families to help them learn how to make shared decisions together. So that's where I come from. But I've been involved in the philanthropic world for many, many years. All right. Charitable planning for mutual success. Can you even see that? I can hardly see it, so I don't think you can see it very well either. Sorry about that. I think it's important to understand the wealth bands that will dictate to some degree, not always, the types of charitable vehicles that your generous families are going to be looking for. For example, in the $25 million plus bandwidth, and we all want those, don't we? They're typically not going to use planned giving vehicles as much as you would think. And why is that? Why do you think that they're less likely to use a deferred planned gift? Anybody want to hazard a guess? Don't speak all at once. They don't need the income. Think about it. So they're typically going to use private foundations or donor-advised funds or a combination of the two, and they'll also use charitable lead trusts that we'll talk about in a little bit. But you think about it, knowing the capability of your donors in terms of their net worth, or the types of assets they have, will help lead you to maybe thinking about the types of vehicles or the type of gifts you want to talk about. Now, since we see the term private foundation and donor advised fund, does that mean we just fold up our tent and go away? No. How many of you are receiving more and more gifts from donor advised funds? So what happens when you do that? Sometimes it comes in anonymously, correct? Very hard to establish a relationship with anonymous, that is for sure. But if you do know the source of the funds or the donor advised fund at the sponsoring organization, you can still reach out and connect with them, because what will they do? Same thing they do if they're a direct donor. They'll want to recommend another grant in the future. Private foundations are a little harder. We all know that, because there's many gatekeepers, and sometimes it's hard to get into their list of grants. But if you do get a grant from a foundation and you know the foundation family that's making that recommendation or making that grant happen in your particular organization, you still go about establishing those relationships and cultivating them over time. I'm probably not telling you anything that you don't already know, but sometimes it's good to hear it, because sometimes those foundations and those donor advised funds seem like they're not really within reach, and I'm just here to tell you that they truly are. So for the 3 to 25 network segment, that's the sweet spot typically for planned giving, is it not? That's where you see people who are willing to do something. It may be a $10,000 charitable gift annuity. It may be something else, but we see charitable remainder trust, charitable gift annuities, charitable lead trust, not as many as we'd like, unfortunately, and outright gifts. But of course, typically with that type of donor, they actually have restrictions on those gifts, do they not? It'd be wonderful if everyone would just give us an unrestricted gift. Unfortunately, we don't see that very often. All right, so let's talk about that in a little bit more detail. Effective estate planning is about raising money. And when I say estate planning, we typically think about bequest. But estate planning is something that's happening all life long if it's done well, because as life circumstances change or financial ability changes, estate planning could end up with these vehicles that we're going to talk about. So what are the most popular charitable vehicles used by the donor in their estate planning? Well, think about it, outright gifts. As an advisor, I always want to ask my client, are you already giving to charity? If not, are you thinking about doing something in your estate plan, whether it's through a bequest in the will, a revocable living trust? What is it that you want to accomplish with your wealth? Do you want it all to go to your children, or do you have some favorite charities that you would like to also include? One of my colleagues from Pepperdine, I loved him because what he did in his estate planning, he had 3 children, and he made Pepperdine the 4th child. I think that's a great idea. Just treat him like the 4th child. So put that in your list of things to think about. Bequests are definitely something that we see a lot of. And more, I think that's true even of people that feel that or have actual wealth but don't feel as wealthy. I can remember in the early 90s visiting with a donor who, at that point, I think she was 90 years old. She was widowed, no children. She had somewhere around $11 million, most of it in fixed income. She was not spending it, and she was adding about $150,000 a year in income, or leaving that income to be reinvested. But she felt poor. Why do you think she felt poor? She felt insecure. She went through the Depression. And so there are some people that just never feel secure again when they go through a financial reversal. I wouldn't be surprised if you're running into that even today after the 2008 depression that we had, so to speak. So even when they have the money, they may not feel secure, and so you're going to have to approach them probably to do a bequest as opposed to an outright gift. I've seen that even with today's recession in 2008. Charitable gift annuity, still one of my favorites. What's so good about a charitable gift annuity? It's simple. It's easy to explain. There's not a 30 or 40-page trust document to go through or have drafted by the advisors. Its hallmark is security. That's why we find primarily that older donors are going to look to use a charitable gift annuity as opposed to a charitable remainder trust, because they know exactly what they're going to get every quarter, every 6 months, however it's designed, and they even know how the payments will be taxed. What a great deal. It's simple, it's secure, and as long as you have those as a feature for people that are looking for security, that's a great, great, great vehicle to use. But it's not for everyone. Charitable remainder uni trusts are coming back, as was indicated in one of the speakers today. We're seeing it more and more. Why? Because the income tax is becoming more important than the estate tax. We all know that we've seen a change in the applicable life exclusion. Now, I guess this year it's 11,200,000, I think, and it's going to be indexed for inflation and go up every year. That's kind of an amazing change. So if you don't have an estate tax problem, what are you going to try to cue in about with your donors? They may have an income tax problem. I live in California. It's the third highest tax jurisdiction, not in the United States, but in the world. You think income taxes might be something that individuals in California need to be more aware of, and your plan giving vehicles can help solve some of those problems. Charitable lead trust. How many of you done a charitable lead trust in the last 5 years? Just a handful. Why is that? We've had the lowest rate environment. I can't remember when we had a lower interest rate environment, and yet we're still not able to get our donors to pull the trigger and do charitable lead trust. Well, we're going to go through one at the end, but keep that in mind, because either we're not communicating effectively or they just don't want to give up control. Is that pretty true? Okay, so we'll come back to that. So we all know life income plans are pretty simple. Income to the donor, remainder to charity. Sometimes it's the donor and the donor's spouse. But what are they? They're just gifts which provide a stream of income. And it can be for a term of years, it can be for a lifetime, it can be a 5% uni trust payout, it can go up to 50%, but I've never seen one. Has anyone seen a 50%? What's the highest you've seen? Shout it out. Highest payout rate on a charitable trust? 10 to 12. I saw 10 to 12 or 15% back in the 90s. Haven't seen them since. What are you saying is the right payout rate now, on average, for a charitable remainder trust that you would like to be a part of? 5%? 5 to 7, even 7's kind of pushing the envelope, unless you have the ability to allocate capital gains to income, and that's another story. Charitable gift annuities, again, we talked about it. What are the benefits? I love it when I can say to a donor that they have one asset that's very large, very, very valuable, but it has a low basis. When you think about charitable remainder trust, it's not the income tax deduction that they're looking for. What are they looking for? They want to give it to the charitable remainder trust, have the charitable remainder trust, which is a tax-exempt entity, sell it, not have to pay Uncle Sam for the privilege of selling it, and then take and reinvest those proceeds unreduced by the capital gains tax. Because do you avoid capital gains in any of these particular vehicles? I know we like to say you avoid the tax on the transfer or the sale by the trust or the charitable, or even with the charitable gift annuity. You don't avoid the capital gains tax, you just defer it over time. But time value of money makes it more important that you have the ability to reinvest in that tax-free environment like an IRA. I find when you talk about the tax-free environment, kind of analogize it to the IRA, because most individuals have IRAs, and they know that there's no tax when it's being bought and sold inside the IRA, but they also know when it comes out to them, they're going to be taxed on it. So it helps them to understand that this is not a tax avoidance, it's a tax deferral. Important to remember that. You can get a charitable income tax deduction, but I have to tell you, rarely do I see that as the major impetus for doing charitable remainder trust. It eliminates the estate taxes on the charity's remainder interest. In fact, if you do it right, it won't be included in your estate. It will not be subject to taxes, and it avoids probate. Now, California, you want to avoid probate. Do you need to avoid probate here? So you don't have what we had in Texas, which was an independent administration, where when I would go and probate a will, I would be the only person in front of the judge. I would prove up the will with a self-proving affidavit. I'd testify that it was signed, it was witnessed, and that's all I had to do. And I never saw the court again because we mailed an inventory with a order for the court to fill out 9 months later. So it was a pretty simple process, but most states are not that, I want to say enlightened, and that's kind of disparaging, so I don't mean that. But you just don't have that in many states where you truly have an independent administration like Texas. We were a will state in Texas. We never did revocable living trust because there was nothing to avoid, because revocable living trusts are just a means to avoid the probate, not the tax consequences. Many times it's because they weren't released from management fatigue. I had donors who came in with apartment complexes and things like that, and they said, I'm just tired of the calls in the middle of the night to come in and unplug a toilet. So it could be the diversification of a large asset to have a better, less risk involved in the investments. That's a big one. If you have a concentrated stock position, you should think right away, this person has a concentrated stock position, or they have a large piece of real estate, whether it's commercial or it's not, and this is a way for them to diversify in a very tax-efficient manner. Charitable gift annuities, we already talked about. Just again, it's simple. I can't tell you. I never have had anyone struggle with understanding the charitable gift annuity. Because of that, the security and predictability of the income stream is very attractive. All right. So anybody not know all this stuff already? Who knows all this stuff? Most people here. I'm not teaching you something that you don't know, but I think it's important that we just remember how we are out there talking about what we do, because the other thing I want to say is we're talking about the vehicles, but something that I learned early on is this. As plan giving officers in our allied professional networks, we need to be problem solvers and not vehicle pushers. Remember that. If you do, as Lonnie talked today, and move your donors up to 5, 6, 7, 8, you know them well enough that they're going to talk to you in a way that's going to reveal to you what their issues are and what they're trying to accomplish. So if you're listening actively or compassionately and you are hearing that they have these kinds of assets, or hearing that they need a greater stream of income, which a charitable gift annuity could give them over a CD, for example, then this is your opportunity because you spent the time and effort. So you're solving a problem, not just pushing your vehicles to try and fit them into what you feel comfortable doing. That's a critical component. If you're solving their problems, it doesn't mean you're always going to get the biggest gift. It may not be the gift that you would normally want to feature to this individual, but ultimately you'll get the best gift because you've listened, you've understood their objectives and goals, and then you've determined what vehicle or vehicles will help them meet the greatest number of those objectives and goals. All right. What I like about the CGA versus the CRT, just another feature, I said earlier with the CGA, the charitable gift annuity, you know what each payment is going to be and even the taxation of that. That's a great feature. With the CRT, you may, in some cases, depending upon the type of CRT you're creating, actually have increasing income over time. But have you noticed that when a donor hears that they're going to get a 7% uni-trust payout, that if it comes in lower than that, that they're mad at you? They don't remember the long conversation about that we revalue the assets every year, apply that payout percentage rate to that new value, and if the value has gone down, which unfortunately it has in our recent history, not so recent, I guess we're actually 10 years out now, but think about it. They only hear one thing: I'm going to get a 7% payout, and if they don't get it, they're going to be calling you. So setting those expectations is important. But generally, you're also subject to the 4-tier taxation scheme. And we used to call this in our shop, you've heard of LIFO and FIFO? With charitable remainder trust, it's WIFO, worst in, first out. The worst taxed amount, the highest ordinary income tax rates comes out first, and you never get to the capital gains if you don't get rid of all the ordinary income bucket. We called it the 4 buckets, not the 4 tiers. So WIFO is still alive and well. We didn't see any changes with the Tax Reform Act recently. Okay, I wanted to tell you a case study, because another thing that I like to do when I teach this class for the American Institute for Philanthropic Studies, think outside the box. As I said earlier, if you listen to the goals and objectives of your donors and clients, you may find that your array of planned giving vehicles, not one is going to be sufficient to meet those. So you may have to learn to combine techniques. So in this case, this is a true profile. Mrs. Yu is widowed. She's 91 years old, no children. She lives in Malibu on an 11.5-acre residential property on a bluff overlooking the Pacific Ocean. It's a magnificent piece of property. I wanted to live there. The property is her only major asset. That should say ding, 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 warning, warning. But she's finding it difficult to maintain it. She is in need of additional income, and she wants to remain in her home for the duration of her life. That should also give you a bell clanging at that point. She needs additional funds to pay off some current obligations and provide living expenses. And she also needs some assistance in maintaining the property. Out of that scenario, what first comes to your mind? Anybody? No one's ever seen this. You ever heard of a retained life estate? Personal residence remainder interest gift? Have anyone done these? Oh, you need to put this in your quiver. This was a perfect candidate for doing a retained life estate, which generates a significant income tax deduction, charitable income tax deduction. Why? Because this is an easy sell. With the charitable gift annuity, with a retained life estate, the value of that remainder interest is larger as you get older. This is your selling point. You're old today, and that means you get more money. You need to be happy that you're getting older, because it means you're going to get a high CGA rate, and in this case, a larger charitable income tax deduction, because the value of the remainder interest is much larger. But that didn't solve all her problems. So a retained life estate is great. She gets a charitable income tax deduction, but what else did she need? She needed income. She needed to pay off some of her obligations. Anything else? She what? She needed maintenance, some help on maintenance. So that's the profile that we had, and this is what we did. She transfers her remainder interest in her personal residence. It could be a farm if you wanted to do it with a farm. And we did a bargain sale and a charitable gift annuity on the remainder interest. A bargain sale allows us to sell. She sold a portion of the property to us at a bargain price. She got cash up front, which allowed her to pay off her obligations. We did a current charitable gift annuity because we knew she needed X amount of income fixed over her life expectancy. It's not up here, but we also did 2 deferred charitable gift annuities. And people always say, why would you do a deferred charitable gift annuity with a 90-year-old, 91-year-old? Well, how long does a charitable income tax deduction last? The max. 6 years, right? So she was getting the benefit of offsetting some of that charitable gift annuity income with the large charitable income tax deduction she received when she transferred the remainder interest in return for the retained life estate. But in year 7, there was no longer any charitable income tax deduction to utilize, so the deferred charitable gift annuity kicked in to provide her with sufficient income after taxes to maintain the same level of income she wanted for the rest of her life. Now, there's 4 different types of planned giving vehicles in that one case. So if we had just tried to do a retained life estate, it wouldn't have solved her problems. She had multiple problems and needed different vehicles to solve those problems. Now, she didn't quite make it to the deferred charitable gift annuity, but she was happy. And then, as a remainder beneficiary of this property, it was in Pepperdine's best interest to make sure the property was maintained so it didn't deteriorate. So we helped maintain the property. But you have to think outside the box. Now, one important thing that we had is an agreement, what we call an insurance, taxes, and maintenance agreement. You want to have that with anyone that you have a retained life estate so that everyone's expectations have been articulated. And so we did that as well. But she was a very, very happy person because we were able to come in and problem solve and met most of all of her objectives over time. So what kind of donor do you want to have if you're going to do this kind of planning? Old. Let's be real. You're not going to do retained life estates with 60-year-olds, maybe not even 70-year-olds. I think now it's probably closer to 75 or 80, because the bad thing about this gift is we could not sell the property to pay for those charitable gift annuities, and they were substantial based on her age and the value of that property. It was a $15 million property. So when you're looking at your donor, you may have these great techniques, but think about what it means to your organization. Fortunately, we had a large enough endowment that we could afford to go negative. That's what you call going negative on real estate for a period of time, recognizing that the payoff in the future would be significant. Not everyone can do that. So what do? You say, oh, Claudia, we can't do that. We don't have that. Partner with another organization that can. One thing I think we forget about as organizations is that maybe we don't have the same resources, but we have a network that comes through these kinds of associations that says maybe we should partner with someone. Maybe you can't, I don't know, can you just issue charitable gift annuities here without any licensure requirements? You can? Oh, you're lucky. In California, we can. So not everyone can issue a charitable gift annuity in California, so we say partner with the community foundations. Many of them will serve as that partner to issue the charitable gift annuity, but you participate in the remainder benefits. So any questions about this? No questions. Good. I'm so good you don't have any questions? Or did you just get confused? Yes?
So in relation to the remainder interest, how did you accommodate for the possibility, maybe probability, that she would become disabled and have to leave the home?
Good question.
Like, who would be responsible for determining when she would have to leave the home?
Well, we would have to have her doctors determine that. She had no family, per se. So if we saw that she needed more care than she could have, bringing in caregivers, what part of that annuity and the bargain sale element was to make sure she could bring in caregivers 24/7. That was one of her reasons for staying in the home, but she would need that kind of help. But many of you don't know that if you do a retained life estate, because the donor is the life tenant, they can leave the property and rent it, and they take all the rents, because as the life income interest, they are the ones that would receive any rent. So they could rent it out and continue to receive income. They could join with the university and sell it to a third party and then split the proceeds actuarially based on her age at that time. Now, that's not the best way to do it because she's getting older. Her life interest is getting smaller. So I would say probably the best solution would be able to put her in a nursing home where she could get the type of care that she might need. She never had to get to that point, so we didn't have to deal with that. But by having this kind of transaction, she was land rich and cash poor, and this allowed her to get everything she wanted at that point in time? Good question. Anything else? All right. All right, let's look at it. How many of you understand the world of charities? We think we do, don't we? But I don't know about you, but I have clients and I had donors come in all the time and say, oh, I have a 501c3 organization. And I'm going, okay, that's like telling me you have a car. What's the make and model? Most of us really don't understand the difference between a private foundation and a donor advised fund or other public charities. So sometimes we need to know ourselves, because when you're competing against a private foundation, for example, you might be able to say to them, you know, if you could give it to us directly and get a larger charitable income tax benefit than if you give it to your private foundation and then re-grant it out to us. That's one thing you can think about. Whether or not you do that is another thing. But I like people to understand that there are two worlds. The public charity world, if you do not fall within 509A1, 509A2, and for those of you who are tax nerds, 509A3 for supporting organizations, you are by default a private foundation. So there's no definition of a private foundation in the tax code. You're a private foundation unless you can qualify as a public charity. Why is that important? Because you get less bang for your buck for gifts to a private foundation than you do to a public charity. This is a wonderful way for you to help your donors understand that you'll get more benefits if you give to us rather than stashing it away in your private foundation. Does that always work? Absolutely not. And the reason is going to become apparent. Private foundations, you can do a lot of what we call legacy planning, venture philanthropy, impact giving, compensated managers, although I try to always talk any family out of having their children come work for their private foundation and pay them to do so. Unless they really are going to run it, they have the skills and competencies to run and manage a private foundation. If they're just looking for another way to give them a job, I try to discourage that every single time. A private foundation also has state filings, annual filing of the IRS 990-PF, or have to go through the attorney generals in different jurisdictions, lower contribution, and look at all these rules. Have a lot more rules when a private foundation will. Sometimes that's discouraging, and what does that mean they'll do? That doesn't always mean they're going to give it to you. They may decide, well, then we'll go to a donor advised fund. Donor advised funds are great too, because they're simple to administer, there's no startup cost. They are going to give you an immediate tax deduction, the highest tax deduction, and by the way, I believe that donor advised funds, since they are public charities, will get the benefit as you do. People who give you cash now get the 60% AGI limitation as opposed to the 50%. It's flexible recognition for grant making. They can always choose what they want to do in terms of being anonymous or not. They can choose any name they want. I ran a donor advised fund for about 8 years, and one of my favorite donor advised fund names was from a friend of mine, and he called his fund the Scrooge Foundation. For the good Scrooge, not for the bad one. So you don't have to have your name in it, and that is attractive to a lot of your wealthier donors and clients because they want that anonymity, and so by not having their name on their fund, it gives them the ability to be a little bit more anonymous. It gives you time to build up your fund account. Private foundations have to make distributions of 5% of the net asset value of the foundation every year. That means if they're a large foundation, think about the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. Think how much they have to give away every year. Millions and millions and millions. I think it's $50 million or more a year. It's not easy to give that away and do it well. That's the bottom line. But they have to in a private foundation. At this point, that same 5% required minimum distribution is not going, 5% minimum distribution is not going to be applied on a fund-by-fund, donor advised fund account. It's now at the aggregate level. But we don't know how long that will last because Congress doesn't like donor advised funds. They can only recommend grants. Every time I had someone come to me when I was running a donor advised fund, they say, I direct you to make this grant to this organization. I said, well, you can recommend that we make this grant. Because legal authority resides with the board of directors, not with the donor. Once it gets into the donor advised fund sponsoring organization's hands, they have to be the ones to agree to the grant request. Yes?
I know that in principle, but in practice, do you ever really hear, in practice, do you ever really hear of that happening where the donor advised fund, I mean, other than if they don't have the right credentials or the right status, but in terms of purely
if after all the due diligence, rarely do you see the advice that's not taken.
Right.
But I'm probably one of the few people that has actually turned down my own grant request, my grant recommendation. It's true, I did it to myself because I found out that the American Legion Auxiliary Girls State Program, that was a 501c19, and we only could make grants to 501c3s. So I had to write rejection on my own grant recommendation. That was kind of embarrassing, but you learn from it, and you'd be surprised how many times you'll get these odd recommendations for grants that are down to pennies, and then you wonder, then you have to do more due diligence, because then you're going to find out that there's something about this, there's a quid pro quo or something that's happening, and you have to go back and question the donor about their recommendation, which is never fun either, but it is part of the job, right? Are you working with any donor advised funds?
I do, but I just philosophically, in terms of understanding, I know once the money switches over, it's technically the donor advised fund
Technically.
responsibility.
Yeah.
But in practice, it seems like unless there's something really wrong with the transaction.
Yeah. Well, usually you turn them down because it's amazing to me that people there's a tragedy in your community, and what's the first people do? Set up an account at a bank and have people contribute, donate to that to help that wonderful family. That's not a charitable donation at all. So I had that come through quite a bit, or they want you to buy a ticket at the gala. Can't do that. Can't do that. Can't have that kind of quid pro quo. Now you can if you want them to, if you say when you ask them to make that grant to the gala that you're not going to go, and you're not going to decide who sits at the table. You could do that, but you got to do that on the front end. I could talk all day about donor advised funds. What I like about donor advised funds, and I have one, how many of you really struggle at year end to get all your charitable giving done? Anybody but me? Am I the Lone Ranger? Thank you, at least we're together. But you're scrambling at year end because that's when people are figuring out what their tax liability will be. And I find it's easier, just for me, to give it to my donor advised fund because it's one gift substantiation letter I have to keep track of. Because inevitably, you'll get all these different gift letters back and you're going, oh, where did I put that? So I'm just too scatterbrained. Yes?
Likewise, we've had private foundations that have done their 5% payout to the community foundation and established a donor advised fund.
Yes, very common where you have a private foundation because they get close to year end and they have to meet their own 5% minimum distribution, that they will instead set up a donor advised fund and grant the money over to the donor advised fund so they have more time to do the due diligence or figure out what they're going to care about and make grants to over time. You got to be careful because if it's a straw man, the IRS could come back and try to say that the gift was really not to the donor advised sponsoring organization. I see it more when people are trying to figure out, I can't make a direct gift to a foreign charity because individuals, if you make a gift to most foreign charities, there's a lot of rules around this, you don't have the opportunity to take a charitable income tax or gift tax deduction, and you are actually going to be using up your annual exclusion and your lifetime exemption. Those are not, you don't get a charitable deduction. So a lot of private foundations who want to do good things but also don't have the capability to exercise expenditure responsibility to make foreign grants. Private foundations and public charities do foreign grant making a lot, but it means you have to be very careful and the rules are really strict. So a lot of times they'll use a donor advised fund sponsoring organization to do that expenditure responsibility for them. So I see it in a lot of different ways. All right, everybody knows this, private foundations. You put it in there. The only way, oh, I'm sorry, there's another question. Sorry about that. I get so excited. Lonnie, you have nothing on excited.
I have a quick question about donor advised funds. we're receiving significant commitments almost on a weekly basis. And those commitments are for what could be considered multiple year gifts, but it's tied to the donor advised fund, so there's non-binding commitments. And we've just begun to ask ourselves, do we as an institution, should we be thinking about potential liability for all of these non-binding commitment letters that we're receiving, which really is beginning to culminate in millions and millions of dollars? And we're wondering what other charities have done to address this issue.
Well, what I would do, anytime someone wanted to make it's important that the terminology is understood. A donor advised fund cannot distribute funds to satisfy the donor's legal obligation for a pledge. So that's the first question. If it's a non-binding request, I would always say that it's only going to be fulfilled to the extent there are assets in the account. That's it. If there's a commitment and it's no longer there, you're off the hook. So it's important to put language in when you're discussing that with the donor and with the organization that has gotten this non-binding intent to give kind of thing, that they understand we're not going to be legally responsible unless there are actual funds in the account to satisfy that intent to give. Does that make sense? Good question. No more questions? Okay. Oops. So what I like about this is, remember, with private foundations, not every asset is equal. So you may have a donor out there who has that piece of real estate, or they may have a non-marketable security, closely held business, stock, etc. If they were to give anything other than marketable securities or cash to their private foundation, their charitable deduction is limited to the basis in those assets. Only marketable securities and cash is cash, only marketable securities are allowed to receive the fair market value as the measure of their charitable income tax deduction. So a lot of times donors don't understand that. So you can be a resource for them and say, look, we're a public charity. Those rules don't apply to us. Now, whether we should take the asset is another issue, but at least you have the opportunity to say, not a good idea unless it's high basis assets other than marketable securities to put into your private foundation, because you're going to get very little in terms of your charitable income tax deduction. I think we have some copies of this, and if you want this particular, these slides, let me know and I'll get them to you. But I've kind of put the pros and cons between a private foundation and a donor advised fund. But I want you to know why a donor would use a donor advised fund over a private foundation. They don't want to run another business. A private foundation is just another kind of business. You still have to maintain the corporate formalities or the trust requirements. So if they want to run another business, then this may be for them. But they may be too busy. They may desire simplicity. They may have a need for privacy. The ultimate oxymoron in this world is private foundation. There's nothing private about it, other than me, a fast-talking Texan, which is truly the ultimate oxymoron. Funding asset issues, which we just talked about, lower AGI limitations available for gifts to a private foundation. Let's think about it. Do you think the IRS likes private foundations? No, that's why they make it more expensive and give you less bang for your buck from a tax perspective. So the measure of the deduction, depending upon if it's other than marketable securities, is going to be basis. And there's no administration duties with a donor advised fund, and it's less costly to have a donor advised fund than a private foundation. Now, why would a family choose a private foundation over a DAF? Anybody know? Control. Remember the real estate? Location, location, location. It happens in this world. Control, control, control. They are something that can last in perpetuity, whereas donor advised funds, you have to check with the sponsoring organization to see how long they will allow you to have advisors to the fund over multiple generations. Its ability to manage investments. When you have a donor advised funds, you're typically going to be given different kinds of pools to choose from in terms of how you would recommend the investments being made for your particular account. Although more and more, there are sponsoring organizations that will allow you to have your own personal investment advisor continue to advise. So you have to check to see if that's important. Yes?
Are private foundations status any harder to get now through Treasury than they were 20 years ago? Or 10 years or 5? I mean, I've just heard they're a little harder, but then I've also heard they are not.
I don't think private foundations are much harder. I think public charities are much harder to get.
Okay.
That's where I see. Anybody else have a comment on that who helps to formulate these? All right. But I haven't seen it's pretty easy to set up a private foundation, and it's pretty easy for the IRS to grant your exempt status. Yes?
I have a question that relates.
You have a question, what?
That relates to the conversation.
Okay.
I work for a nonprofit, a charity. How would you advise us when we find ourselves in the middle of conversations with donors who are considering or sharing with us that they're talking about setting up a private foundation, along with other, state plans, and how we can thoughtfully direct the conversation towards a gift now to the charity instead of waiting until the private foundation's set up? I think we've found ourselves in the middle of those conversations at least 3 to 4 times over the past year.
Yep.
And I just want to know how far you would advise us,
Okay.
how far we should go.
Good question. I believe that education is part of our role. And it's kind of tough because you have a vested interest in them not initially setting up a private foundation, because you would rather that they create an endowment in your charity rather than the endowment in their private foundation, right? Because you have access to the money and you get to make the decisions. Having said that, I think that you just say, well, why is it that you want to create this? Who's going to run it after you're gone? What are your intentions in terms of, is this going to last for multiple generations? Are your children going to be asked to be involved? Are they interested? Is this going to be a founder's foundation or a family foundation? Do you know the difference? Because if you want your children to participate and take over after you're gone, but they're going to have to carry out your philanthropic vision and not their own, how long will they remain interested? We can take some of the burden off of having to run another business by you giving it to us rather than creating your own private foundation. Are you aware of all the rules that apply? You educate them. You don't have to advocate one way or the other. You just ask those probing questions to make sure they know what they're getting into. How much do you plan to put into it in order to create this private foundation? There's people all over the place in terms of how much is necessary to start a private foundation, but with technology, it used to be, I would say, 5 to 10 million at a minimum. But now technology makes it easier and simpler sometimes to manage all the ins and outs of a private foundation. So that number has come down. But I still believe if you're going to be in a business like this, then I still think 5 million is usually going to be the lowest that should be. Either maybe not now, maybe you fund it a little bit now and then fund it more at death, but I would ask those kinds of questions, and they will lead you to your conclusion. Does that make sense? Well, my pleasure. All right, mission and impact investing, you can also do that. Charitable lead trust. I'm so sorry we're not seeing more of these, because this is the right time for charitable lead trust. Misnomer though, and I teach this class every year, and I'm always surprised when I get to charitable lead trust, and I say, what's the big difference between a charitable lead trust and a charitable remainder trust? What's the big difference? 2 big differences. Give me one. That's it. One is tax exempt and one is not. A charitable lead trust is not a tax exempt entity at all. And most donors don't know that either. So why would people do it? Is this a charitable play or an estate planning play? It's all about estate planning more than it is about charitable planning. Because most people who use this kind of entity are doing it because they want to transfer assets ultimately to their heirs or beneficiaries with the least transfer tax cost. And they do so by interposing in between the donor and the ultimate beneficiaries a charitable entity to receive income during the term of that trust. What does that do? it means that the value of the remainder interest, which is going to go to family, is small, and so the transfer tax at the time the trust is created is less. And so I think there's a lot of confusion out there about charitable lead trust, but the main one is it's not a tax-exempt entity at all. I've had people who've told me about horror stories where they were advised by their advisors, and I won't tell you which field, but they were said, put this into your charitable lead trust, sell it tax-free, and ultimately give it to your children. And they just triggered all the capital gain in the year of the sale. Not a good result, I can promise you. Find good advisors to work with because it does make a huge difference. You use it when the non-charitable beneficiaries will not need the trust assets now. I typically see this with, you may have a concentrated stock position, or you may have marketable securities, or you have a legacy asset that you want ultimately to get to the next generation. If you don't need the income from it now, this is a great vehicle to move it intergenerationally. It's designed to pass the wealth to the next generation with less transfer tax because the value of the remainder is based on the applicable federal rate, which is still historically low. And at that time, it assumes you hope that this asset also has the potential to appreciate in excess of the applicable federal rate or the 75/20 rate, whatever, usually with the rates being so low, you can usually outperform that and therefore get more appreciation down to the ultimate beneficiaries. So that's the reason why people do it. You have two types, charitable lead annuity trust, charitable lead uni trust, very similar to the charitable remainder trust. The difference being that you don't have a floor of 5%, there's no floor, and you don't have a ceiling on how much you can pay out. It's going to be determined by the needs of the individual. If you want to zero out or get as close to zero in the value of the remainder interest in order to not unduly use your applicable lifetime exemption, great way to move it. They just have to wait for it. So the beneficiaries have to wait for it, and you as a nonprofit get the benefit of income being distributed to you over that term. So charitable lead annuity trust, same as a CRT. You have the initial value times the percentage payout rate. That doesn't change over time. Same thing with the charitable remainder uni trust. It's revalued every year. You apply that percentage payout, and that's what's going to be distributed to your organizations. What I like about this is when you talk about charitable remainder trust, how many are there? How many flavors? You've got the standard CRUT, you've got the NICRUT, the NIM CRUT, the FLIP CRUT. My eyes roll back in my head. But with charitable lead trust, you've got a charitable lead annuity trust, a charitable lead uni trust. There's no NICLUT, NIM CLUT, there's none of that. So it's a little easier to get out of the alphabet soup. I'm not going to spend any time on this because we're running out of time, and I want to get to fortune hunting for donors because it's fun to talk about that. But if you want to know more about it, it can be a very complicated area because of the tax rules, but suffice it to say, as plan giving officers, you need to know enough that you can talk about it generally and then help them work with their outside advisors to find the right flavor and the right structure based on their personal situation. But this is a great planning tool, and we just don't talk about it, I think partly because we haven't done very many. Even our advisors haven't done a lot in many cases, so they're not comfortable talking about that which they don't have a lot of experience with. But this is a tool that should stay in our toolbox. All right, I have I want to talk about fortune hunting for donors. Been talking about it all day, right? That's what the game is. We need to find people to support our mission. It's a fabulous mission. And by the way, I think it's important that we don't always talk about getting a gift. I prefer to say we want you to invest in our organization. We want you to invest in our students. This is a good investment, not just an outright charitable gift. I think people listen with a different ear when they hear investment. You're partnering with your donors as you go through this process. And they feel a part of the organization more when they're investing in your cause as opposed to just giving to your cause. Okay, 4 clues to look for when scouting plan give prospects. Gray hair. Young is okay, but old is better. They're more likely to have accumulated assets because now, they are on the other side and they have assets that they can give. They're more likely to be introspective and legacy-driven. Have any of you read David Soley's book, How to Say It to Seniors? Highly recommend it. It's a great book because it helped 25 years ago when I heard him speak. It kind of hit me that I'm approaching our older donors all the wrong way, because they have a developmental task as they get older, just as you do with your younger kids. What's their developmental task? Retain control. Ooh, we're trying to take it away from them. And legacy. They need to make sense out of what's happened in their past in order to feel that they have significance. So you may hear the same story over and over again, not because they have dementia, but because they're trying to articulate their life and they want to figure out what that legacy looks like. But control, what do we do when we talk to them? We want you to give us an asset. We want you to give us control of your financial assets when all around them they're losing control. They're losing because they're losing friends who have died. They may be losing physical functions. They may be losing a lot of things that we don't even think about. And now we're saying we want to take more control from you. It's easy to say no to someone if that's what they're being asked to do. So you need to speak with them a different way. They need to give you control, not just ask to take it away. So his book, I highly recommend it. Whoops. Their net worth looks good on paper. You know, is there high appreciation on the house or real estate, marketable securities, a business, collectibles? How many of you are seeing more business gifts being made to you? Nobody? We're seeing a lot of LLC interest being brought to the table, or C corporations for private businesses. We see that a lot in California. I don't know if you're seeing it out here, but just because it's a business doesn't mean that you need to say no immediately. Look at the asset. And we could talk about just how to take in those kinds of assets, because there is a way to do it well where both the donor and your organization can win. They are facing important decisions, changing residence. That should be a clear one. If you're going to be moving to Florida, what's happening to this asset? This might be the perfect asset now to put into a charitable remainder trust. So listen for that. They're selling their property or their business. We're seeing a lot of changes with the transfer of wealth, and we have a lot of family businesses that are going to be transferring or being sold. Perfect opportunity to use charitable planning. Recent death in the family, departure from job, all kinds of things. They think they've got a problem. Is it a tax problem? Is it property management? Are all their eggs in one basket? Do they just need liquidity? Those are the kinds of things that you're going to look for. And then be sure to tell them the benefits of doing these kinds of gifts. Don't try to sell them. Try to solve whatever problem or issue you just heard about in your conversation. And then just help them understand the benefits. Many times you can get better income, more income, provide income for heirs, and even spendthrift protection. Sometimes you don't want to give that asset outright to that child. I rarely see parents give assets outright to children. Now, there are wealthier, but why would you do that when you know if you put it in trust, they get creditor protection? And so there's lots of ways to design these things, but you can talk about charitable giving as a way to do that as well. Avoidance of management fatigue and conversion of illiquid or problem or low income producing asset to a higher income producing. So now you've heard a fast talking Texan. We've covered a lot. I hope that you've taken something from this, some kernel that will help you to be better in problem solving and finding that you think outside the box, mix and match those vehicles. One thing that I didn't say, with a charitable lead trust, because the beneficiaries ultimately have to wait to receive that property until the term of the trust is over, combine it with a charitable remainder trust, where they're getting income during that term so that they're not left without resources if you're trying to take care of family and charity at the same time. Just a few tidbits. Think outside the box and be sure to have fun. It's a creative process that we're involved in. It's a lot of fun. And I hope that today you go away with lots of tidbits from all your sessions. So thank you for having me here today.